promoting the free exchange of ideas, questioning the status quo, and having some fun along the way. This is the Are We Idiots Show. Now here are your hosts, Mark Weaver and Rich Kroll.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Are We Idiots Show. We are your hosts, as always, Mark Weaver and Richard Kroll.
Marcus Weaver, great to see you. You know what's funny? A couple of weeks ago, I walked in your studio, and it was about 100 degrees Kelvin. And then I walk in today, and it's about 45 below Celsius.
I have high tolerance ranges.
I don't get what's going on. There's icicles coming from the ceiling. Before, there were plants dying right before my eyes. What's going on with this studio?
I got my air conditioning fixed. So we have to have the air conditioning in the summer to tape, and we are comfortable today. And we're ready for one of the best parts of my week, taping the show.
Wow, that's scary.
So we have a great show planned, and we're going to get right into it this week because I have a feeling this could be a little bit of a long show. I say this a lot, but it could go a lot of different directions, this show topic. But we're going to first do the Idiot of the Week award, and Rich has some nominees for me. And then we're going to
my turn this week?
It is your turn. You better be prepared. Legalization of the marijuana. And we didn't have the appropriate music this week. We should have had if I was thinking ahead, I would have had the
Jamaican
music this week. Oh, well, I'll get better as I go on. And then you waited for it, listeners. We're going to conclude the show with another edition of the Kroller Wiki.
Exciting. Very exciting.
All right, so we're getting right into it. What is the Idiot of the Week? What's the first nominee you have there, sir?
So normally I try to come up with nominees that have some perverse humor or some ludicrous angle that we can laugh at somebody's expense.
Whereas I usually nominate drunks.
You're good with drunks. I'm good with bears. Bear-related stories.
Yes.
This one's a little more straightforward. Just flat out idiot, in my opinion. And they're both related. I did they're tied together, which is interesting.
You're getting good at that.
I'm getting better. Her sitcom returned in March after a 2-decade absence to enormous ratings on ABC. It was the first time in 24 years that ABC had a #1 show. But on Tuesday, that all came crashing down. ABC abruptly canceled Roseanne hours after she posted a racist tweet about Valerie Jarrett, an African-American woman who was a senior advisor to Obama throughout his presidency and considered one of his most influential aides. Roseanne wrote, "If the Muslim Brotherhood and Planet of the Apes had a baby equals VJ." Now,
Valerie Jarrett.
If that's not bad enough, along with a racist tweet, Barr shared a picture of a character from Planet of the Apes. Roseanne later blamed her actions on, "It was 2 a.m. and I was on Ambien." Now Roseanne is getting angry about the backlash, saying it was insensitive, not racist, and she is looking into her options to fight back.
So, I don't know if you saw, there's an update to this. I didn't know you were going to do this. By the way, listeners, we don't know what each other's going to say. We don't rehearse any of this. We don't script any of it. But actually, yesterday, Santa Fe, who's the maker of Ambien, sent out a tweet, which I thought was snarky and beautiful. It said, lots of pharmaceuticals have side effects. Racism is not one. Racism is not one of Ambien's,
That's
which I
a great
thought was
comeback.
great.
So that's nominee one.
Here's my comment before you go on. ABC should have known what they were getting into. I mean, Roseanne Barr has a 25-year history of being a total idiot and
Grabbing her crotch during the national anthem?
that's probably one of many they could have. I mean, they had to know what they were getting into here. That's
You would think.
next
But
one.
they did it for a #1 ranking, and they got that.
Yeah, and now they got something else.
Now they got something else. Now, on top of this, Roseanne is a big President Trump supporter. What did Donald Trump have to say about this? He could have, 1, condemned Roseanne for her views, or 2, made it about himself. Let's guess what he did.
Yeah, but that's a toughie.
Here's Trump's tweet about this. Bob Iger of ABC called Valerie Jarrett to let her know that ABC does not tolerate comments like those made by Roseanne Barr. Gee, he never called President Donald J. Trump to apologize for the horrible statements made and said about me on ABC. Maybe I just didn't get the call. Now, this is the second time this week Trump has taken a major national moment and made it about himself. His Memorial Day tweet was as follows. Happy Memorial Day. Those who died for our great country would be very happy and proud at how well our country is doing today. Best economy in decades, lowest unemployment numbers for blacks and Hispanics ever, and women in 18 years, rebuilding our military, and so much more. Nice exclamation point.
So, yeah, Donald, as the leader of our country, supposedly, you're supposed to be spending the day thinking about others. I know that's kind of hard for you, but I don't think he has it in him, truthfully. So, if you're asking me to vote on those two, I could, I'm a little different from you. I could probably nominate Trump every single week because I'm only a 20% approval of Trump's what he does.
I'm 50.
Okay, you're
maybe
50.
40 now. I'm getting down
50.
lower.
But in my mind, ABC, it was well known who Roseanne Barr was, what she was about, that she was totally unpredictable. She was a wild person on Twitter for years. And, to me, Roseanne Barr is not the idiot of the week because she's been the idiot of her life. So I will pick Donald J. Trump for making Memorial Day about himself, a 5-time draft deferment person, by the way, because I think he had some kind of foot problem or something, like flat feet or a callus on his foot.
Hot foot?
Yeah, he had some kind of
Turf toe?
He had turf toe or flat feet or a bunion or something. It was something stupid like that he used to defer, which of course all the rich people did back at Vietnam days. All the rich people, they never go to war. It's always the underclass that goes and fights the war for these. No, don't get me started on the military. I'm going on a tangent. So Donald Trump, you send that dollar. Now he's worth $1.5 billion and plus $1 or
Or the $1 will help him get out of his next bankruptcy.
All right, so let's transition. And Richie, I'll be the first to admit, I have no idea where this is going to go. Last week we talked about legalized sports betting. On a previous show, we talked about how norms change in society over time, and we brought up marriage equality, how that's quickly came upon us. Sports betting, gambling's more pronounced all over through society, and of course, today we're talking about marijuana legalization that first started 2012 in Colorado and Washington State, and it's gone on from there. I think 16 states now or more have medical marijuana legalization. It's widely expected to continue to be legalized for recreational use. And I have some feelings about this more on a principled basis. As you know, libertarians tend to believe that as long as you don't hurt someone or take any of their stuff, they should be able to do whatever they want. And that's kind of the way I feel about any of these vices, so alcohol, cigarettes, marijuana. And truthfully, as we get into this, this could lead to other drugs, and that may be controversial to say. So let me first talk about it at a high level. I think that people should be free to do whatever they wish, and hence, I agree, even though I'm not a user of marijuana, that it should be legalized everywhere. What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't know that there's much difference between legalizing marijuana and legalizing alcohol and legalizing gambling. I mean, there's all negative connotations to all of it when done improperly or not used modestly. So right now, I don't really care. I mean, I see the benefits, again, maybe the taxes and other things that, gosh, if we legalize gambling and marijuana, imagine the money that could come in because people are just going to do it no matter what, and it goes towards programs for the state or the Fed or whatever. So I'm not opposed to it. However, I am opposed to people just assuming there's nothing to it, and that marijuana use. I'm also not a pot smoker, never have been, but people are saying, "Oh, it's not addictive. It's not a progressive drug. It doesn't lead to any negative behavior." And I have a lot of data that contradicts that comment.
Lay it on me.
All right. So we typically envision someone who's addicted to hardcore drugs like cocaine, heroin, methamphetamines. And most Americans think that marijuana smokers choose to do that and they can stop whenever they want to. However, scientific evidence is now proving that's not necessarily the case, although it's not nearly like cocaine or the other hardcore drugs. But according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, that's NIDA, for your information,
Okay,
NIDA.
I've never heard that acronym, but I'll go with it.
Marijuana is the most commonly abused illicit drug in the U.S. Roughly 15% of those who experiment become addicted. For those who begin using pot as children or teenagers, that risk of addiction grows to 20%, and roughly 25% of everyone entering drug rehab indicated that marijuana was the primary drug that they abused. Now, why is this? Well, wait a minute. Marijuana contains over 400 chemical substances, the main one being, if I pronounce this correctly, tetrahydrocannabinol, THC.
Right.
And that's the main active ingredient that impacts the receptors located throughout the body's central nervous system and brain. And these receptors affect pleasure, memory, thought, concentration, perception, appetite, pain, and coordination.
Right. So your premise is that there are bad substances out there in marijuana, but I would argue that couldn't you make the same case for a lot of drugs, including a lot of the ones that are deemed legal, which also get abused. And so that's where I'm struggling with all these counter arguments is it'd be one thing if we were this pure society where there were no legal drugs, but as we've seen in recent years, legal drugs are killing a lot more people than illegal drugs. Opioids are now, fentanyl and opioids are killing people right and left, especially because they mix them with Ambien and those types of drugs.
Like Roseanne?
Well, hopefully she's not doing fentanyl and opioids. But, there's an opioid epidemic, they're calling it, right? And so these are legal drugs that people are abusing, that doctors have been prescribing. And I don't really see the difference. Why is it that some are deemed legal? In fact, there's a whole classification. I don't know if we'll have time to get into it, but the DEA actually classifies drugs, and marijuana is a Schedule I drug, along with heroin, LSD, ecstasy, quaaludes, bath salts, and a number of other ones.
Well, I agree with bath salts.
Well, you haven't taken a bath in a while. I can smell it. But no, I guess my point is that what's the difference? What's the difference? Why is there this hypocrisy about the government deeming some drugs legal, which are obviously lethal and more lethal than marijuana? Why is marijuana put in the same category as that? And why is certain drugs deemed illegal and certain not? And we can talk about, the fact is, as you know, I don't believe changing a law changes anything. We talked about it last week.
I know. I'm well aware of that.
Well, you even agreed last week with sports betting. You said people are going to bet. It doesn't matter what the law is. People are going to find a way to bet. So to be consistent, you should say the same thing about drugs and guns, by the way.
I'm never consistent.
Okay.
You're such a generalist.
I'm a principled person. I just don't think with feelings. I think with facts.
You are a generalist, literalist.
Principlist.
Not to be confused with cannibalist.
And I have no common sense, Thomas Paine. Is that what you're going to tell me?
I won't rub that in.
Okay.
No, okay, look. I agree that there are some legalized drugs that nobody even considers that are probably way worse, like painkillers.
Right, opioids. Yeah,
Right. So, I mean,
they're legal.
Look at how many people get addicted to painkillers, and okay, that's a shame. That's a problem, but it's not really vilified.
Why do you think that is? Because of the money behind it? I mean, what?
I think because everybody's in pain at some point. I think almost every American sprains a knee, has a lower back issue, gets a headache, breaks a wrist, cracks a tooth. So almost everyone, quite frequently, has pain. Pain's intolerable for many, and you want to do something about it. So suppressing pain is just an accepted norm. And if the pain is consistent, persistent, like, say, a ruptured disc in your lower back, and you start taking this stuff every day just to get by, that's kind of swept under the carpet and not recognized that, oh, it's more of a user's fault. It's a user problem. Control yourself. We have these pain suppressants for very necessary reasons.
But wouldn't you think that? I mean, that's the same thing with alcohol, right? Alcohol has a purpose. You know, people enjoy alcohol. They enjoy in moderation. It has a benefit, and I guess cigarettes are not in that same class, but people get benefit out of cigarettes, and they ignore the long-term consequences. And I guess my point is that at some level, everyone's responsible for doing things in moderation and using things responsibly, and it shouldn't be the government to pick and choose winners and losers. It's a common theme with me, I know, but that I don't see the difference between opioids that you get a prescription from a doctor and marijuana or cocaine or heroin, for that matter. What's the difference? You have to use it appropriately.
What if I say I agree? Does that end the conversation?
Oh, that would make a bad show, wouldn't it?
All right, so
but I do have a question for you. So in Colorado, it takes a long time to develop, statistical relevance. You're a big statistics guy.
huge.
And since they've only been legal since 2012, there's really not a long-term study with the effects of marijuana. But one thing that I see as a big problem for law enforcement is they can't detect accurately when someone is high with a test. Like, if you get pulled over with an alcohol stop, the cop can give you a breathalyzer, and it's very accurate. It's admissible in court. They have no way to test right now. And there's an estimate there was like 100 people killed last year in Colorado because they were driving high, which I think is a societal reaction to this legalization that we have to deal with. But cops can't test for it. There's no reliable test for this. TC8. What's the
THC.
THC. Sorry. So I don't know. Have you thought about that? Like that's a good business opportunity if someone can create a test that would be reliable, because I think that's going to be required. Assuming that legalization happens all over in 50 states, there's going to be a lot more people getting pulled over driving high, and someone's got to be able to test this because we have to get it on the same level as alcohol. You can't have people driving around high. That's bottom line. They're going to kill a lot of people.
Well, that's part of the problem, right? So
can I turn the air conditioning on, by the way? I'm getting all hot and bothered again. You told me maybe to turn it off. You were too cold.
I like when you're hot and bothered. It's a turn on. So the deal is that, yes, if more people are comfortable smoking pot, I mean, there's a lot of jobs that do drug testing. Now, all of a sudden, if marijuana is legal,
they can't. They can't test for drugs.
They can't test for drugs.
Right.
So if you have more people on the road, that's a problem. Driving under the influence of marijuana could be just as bad as driving under the influence of alcohol.
Right.
So that would be a problem. I think there's a stereotype, and it may not be just a stereotype. Think about the way we grew up, right? In high school, you had all your cliques. You had the jocks, you had the nerds, you had the burnouts.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
And the burnouts were typically, and this is not just exaggeration, the kids that were like, yo, dude, and they grew their hair longer, and they wore
army
wool
jackets,
caps, and army jackets, and they didn't care. They showed up unmotivated. They didn't play sports. They weren't in any clubs. They were that little clique, the burnouts. They like to smoke their weed.
Right.
Most of those folks did not go to college, did not end up in places of high earning impact, and they were kind of the we don't care, life sucks, or like we're cool and this is what we do, and it's that California.
So is it chicken or egg, though? So did being a burnout cause them to have a relaxed atmosphere towards life, or a relaxed attitude toward life? Or were they that way from the beginning and they were drawn to, so is it a cause and effect, the chicken and egg, use whatever metaphor you want?
Well, some of these tests, and I didn't know, right? I don't have a bias one way or another. But when I looked into a lot of this scientific data, there are studies that show that extended marijuana use causes a decrease in memory, increased blood pressure and heart rate, red eyes, decreased coordination, trouble concentrating, slow reaction time, paranoid thinking, which does not bode well for employment, 40-hour-a-week jobs. And
well, just think about it. If you're altering your mind and your brain cells, it's just probably not good. It's almost like the repetitive head trauma with football. I didn't play football, and I think concussions are obvious. But just think about it logically. If you're banging your head against another person's head, regardless of whether you get a concussion or not, you think that's good for your brain 80 times a practice? I mean, it's just logical. It says that can't be good for you. Same thing with if you're drinking every day and you're modifying your brain, or you're smoking and you're modifying, you're hurting your lungs. You just think about it logically. That can't be good for your body. And most people still smoke marijuana. Ingesting smoke into your lungs, I don't care what people say. That can't be good for your body.
Can you imagine playing football while being high on weed?
and taking a shot of vodka in the process.
And then some Ambien?
We actually played basketball with a guy who used to drink beer and smoke cigarettes during the game. Remember him? I won't bring his name up.
I think it helped his performance.
By the way, can I tell a quick burnout story
Please do.
from high school? So one time, I think I can say his name, Tom Zapp. He was a guy in Havertown growing up, and we had a substitute one day. And I was Weaver, he was Zapp, so he was sat behind me in order, and he was a quote burnout. Super nice guy, by the way. But this substitute came in, old lady, in I think it was geometry class or whatever it was. Tom decided he wanted to smoke a cigarette. In the class. It was in spring, and the windows were open. So he was cupping a cigarette behind me and smoking it and blowing the smoke out the window. So he smoked a cigarette in the classroom. Welcome to public schools in America.
There's a famous song.
She had no clue, by the way. The substitute had no clue.
There's a famous song, Smoking in the Boys' Room.
That's right. He actually did it in the classroom, though. I'm sorry to distract you.
No, I love the distraction. But prolonged use can lead to prolonged psychosis, permanent cognitive impairments, a decrease in motivation, job or school performance, and impairment of social relationships. Here's what's interesting. Studies have shown that those who are addicted to marijuana often have some other type of mental illness, such as schizophrenia, depression, or anxiety. So who knows? I think it's way too early to figure out where this is going.
Exactly.
I'm all for, how about the medical use of marijuana? If it can help glaucoma, or
MS.
Right. Or cancer treatment, or all these other types of ailments that are either mentally disturbing or painful, or, yeah, why the heck I would do it. I'd roll a joint right now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the point is everything has, most things have a benefit and some negative consequences. And it's all about balance. It's about individual responsibility to use them appropriately. And obviously, what Colorado and Washington have seen is, the price goes down when you legalize it. It takes it out from underneath the mob and the underworld. The prices go down.
The mob?
Well, whoever is the drug kings that were running it when it was illegal.
Okay.
Usually that's mob related or something like that, drug kings, whatever. So when it becomes legalized, you drive those people out of business. The price goes down, the quality goes up, tax revenues go up that they can use it for other ones. Criminal justice reform is a topic we should probably use on the show, do on the show sometime. But it takes cops away from busting people for pot. There's lots of positives, and that's why I'm in favor of it. I'm in favor of it from a personal liberty standpoint, but I'm also in favor of it from a practical standpoint as well. And it's up to the individual not to abuse it, just like any other drug.
I think there's a social issue, though, which I noticed firsthand, and I was thinking about in related to young people. So
there's a smell issue, I can tell you that. My wife was in Denver, and Denver smells like pot.
You're, again, a great segue. Do you finally remember how to spell segue?
Yeah, it begins with an A, begins with an S, and ends with an E.
Yes, it does end with an E. So I'm in San Francisco recently, and I was walking along the San Francisco Bay between the Bay Bridge and the Golden Gate Bridge, and there's a beautiful section where cars park for like 100 yards.
Were you sitting on the dock of a bay, Otis Redding?
We're doing a lot of song references today. So I'm walking by, and I start smelling the intense waft of ganja. And I look over, and there's a group of maybe landscapers or some type of blue-collar guys in a truck.
Or tech executives.
Wasn't tech executives. And they're just sitting in the front of this van, smoking weed, blowing it out the window. And I thought, wow.
Are they allowed to do that and drive? I guess the driver wasn't, technically.
Here's
as far as we know.
Can I get through the story? So that's the first guy I pass. and it's very public, very obvious, maybe it's an area no police go, maybe it's that legal, then I come up to another car, a guy's, it's like they're sitting there killing time around lunchtime, looking out at the beautiful view, but they're smoking weed. And then further down, there were two, I'd say, 20-year-olds sitting on a bench, all outwardly passing a joint back and forth. So the whole walk smelled like weed. Now, I personally don't care, do what you want. But what if I was walking with my wife? What if I was walking with my 8-year-old daughter?
Right.
Daddy, what's that smell? What are they smoking there? That looks interesting. And does it conjure up a desire to try something that I normally wouldn't encourage my daughter to do until she's an adult?
Well, yeah.
Or not that I'd encourage her ever.
And this is where conservatives usually come down. They say, well, this points to a further degradation of society. This becomes a norm. If something is deemed legal, then kids will be more inclined to think it's okay. And my retort to that is, well, then why do you have cigarettes being legal? Why do you have alcohol being legal? So the hypocrisy of the government and conservatives in a lot of times. So my take is, and I used to be a conservative, by the way, my take is, in order to protect my right to do and say and worship as I please, then I don't want the government or society dictating what is a private matter. And that way, if things were to turn at the government level, I don't have to worry about them telling me I have to do something that I don't want to do. So let freedom ring. Dilly dilly? No.
If we
weren't ready for that.
If we were at the end of the show, I would have given you dilly dilly. I just stood up and saluted a flag. I don't know what to do.
All right, so we have a few minutes left, and then we got to move on to our Kohler Wiki. We don't want to cut that short. So, any final thoughts on marijuana? And I think we agree that it's going to become legalized everywhere at some point, right? And
Yep.
Despite Jeff Sessions, our current Attorney General, who's trying to fight that, I think the tide is that it's going to be legal everywhere. And I think it sounds like we're both in agreement, but we have some reservations.
This is a moving, morphing, evolving topic. I think it's like anything else. When used in moderation, alcohol is not bad. When used in moderation, painkillers aren't bad. When used in moderation, eating cupcakes isn't bad. So I think pot, for most people, can handle it.
Can I ask you a question? Because I don't know, and you may not know, but maybe some of our listeners know. If you have a drink or two, which is what I typically do, you have maybe a slight high from that. Is there such thing as a slight high? I assume there must be a slight high from marijuana, or is it, are the stages wider? Is there such thing as the equivalent of one drink with, I guess it's one hit? Right?
I don't think so. I mean, with anything, you can build up a tolerance to
Maybe
anything.
I'm showing my ignorance.
No, you're not ignorant. You might be dumb. You're not ignorant. So, for most people, a sip of alcohol, a couple sips, does nothing to them. For most people,
Right.
But I believe, your first or second hit of marijuana will affect you,
Right.
and affect you even more the more you smoke in that particular moment. So, I think there is a slight difference in cognitive impact with a puffing on your first puff versus one sip.
Okay. And to be fair to the marijuana advocates, I realize that there are other ways to ingest marijuana, not just smoking. There's all kinds of edibles now. There's vaping and what have you. So I understand that you don't
Brownies? Have you had any brownies this week?
I haven't. I do have. Unfortunately, I was. I guess I can tell this story. On a golf trip a couple of years ago, I inadvertently ate 2 pieces of edible chocolate, which
What do you mean inadvertently? You found it on the street?
No, there was a whole bunch of goodies, meaning like chips and pretzels and peanuts and all kind of normal off-the-shelf stuff, Pringles, on a golf trip, there's stuff everywhere, right? And somebody on the trip had just laid out dark chocolate.
What was this? A Ridgemont High reunion?
That was a golf trip. And I totally unknowing, because I don't like marijuana, I took a piece. No one warned me, which I think they should have, but I took actually 2 pieces of it. And it wasn't until after I had ingested, someone said, "You know what that is, right?" So anyhow, the bottom line is that there are ways to ingest this. that are not smoking, which are not, putting carcinogens into your lungs. So I want to just acknowledge that I realize that that's
Did you run naked through the quad after you had
no,
that
but
chocolate?
I did not feel good. I did not like it. I was kind of pissed off at the guys that didn't warn me, but I lived. So
You're here today.
I am here today. All right, so we got to move on to the Crawler Wiki. It's been several weeks, and I know Rich has been, just begging me to
I
get
have
this.
not.
He just likes to have me use his name. He likes the branding of the Crawler. All right, Richie. So just to remind listeners, since we haven't done it in a while, I'm going to give Rich a common saying, and he's going to tell us the origin of it, and I'm going to tell him whether he's right or wrong. So the first one is, Rich, when it rains, it pours. So we've all used that. When it rains, it pours. Where did that come from?
That's a pretty easy one, actually. Back in London, in the mid 1900s, a lot of the homes had the original rain spouts on the English Tudor-style homes that were not kept up, and there were often times where somebody would look out the window, even a nominal rainstorm, and it would look like people were pouring pitchers of water down the windows because these rain spouts started to decay, and it looked like you were pouring a pitcher of water versus it just being simple rain.
Interesting. Boy, and it's amazing. You didn't go back as far as normally you go back to medieval times.
Well, that
That's
throws people off. The further back I go, the more they believe me.
They get disconnected if you go too far.
I tried to
back.
mix it up this time.
All right, so we all know that when it rains, it pours is typically seen as in a negative connotation, but actually, it dates back to 1911 when Morton Salt Company developed a new breakthrough in table salt technology. I didn't even know there was such a thing as table salt technology.
Nor did I.
But basically, until then, most table salt was sold in a raw, coarse grain form that clumped and caked when rainy weather made the air in their house even slightly humid. Scientists solved this problem by reducing the grain size and adding a small amount of magnesium carbonate. I bet you never thought that was going to come up on the show today.
MGC?
Right. It's an anti-caking agent. I didn't think I would bring that up today or not. But anyhow, the bottom line is it enabled it to pour more easily and not clump. And actually the saying was, that the slogan that Morton used was, when it rains, it pours. Right? But the original English proverb that they developed it from was, it never rains, but it pours, which did have a negative connotation. So Morton Salt kind of evolved it and
But
took it from
I got the English part right, and I got the century right.
You did. You got the origin. So I'm going to give you a point for that
Thank
one.
you.
But as we know it today, we can attribute it to the Morton Salt Company for an anti-caking agent.
Good to know.
Next one.
MGC.
MGC. Next one. Jumping on the bandwagon. What is that? Where did that come from, Rich?
So that's interesting. I'm going to stay in the current century. So
Okay.
as you may recall, because you're a huge rock and roll fan,
I am. 60s
Right.
and 70s
60s and
mostly. What am I
70s.
wearing right now?
you are wearing a Led Zeppelin T-shirt, kind of an awful brownish tan color. I
got it at Haight Ashbury.
I like the T-shirt. The color.
And I was
don't
not smoking pot when I was in Haight Ashbury, by the
or
way.
eating chocolate either. I
No.
imagine. So, what was the biggest concert in the history of the 60s and 70s?
Woodstock.
Woodstock. Now, as you recall, Woodstock wasn't well planned because they had no idea.
Plus, everyone was high.
And everyone was high. They had no idea the millions of people that would attend to this thing. So it was not properly set up with transportation, with food, with bathrooms, and it rained to complicate things. And the way the bands were coming in, Jimi Hendrix and everybody that showed up for this thing, they didn't have good transportation from the airport. It was in a remote part of upstate New York and not easy to get to. So once in a while, like a flatbed truck would come through, and the bands would jump on that, and that's where it happened. To jump on transportation to get to the stage, they were jumping on the bandwagon.
It was all about logistics at Woodstock. I would have thought you would have gone way back, but no. Actually, Rich, is P.T. Barnum. P.T. Barnum, famous circuiteer. Is that a word? Circuiteer?
It is now.
Were known for their showy parades through town before they were to set up the circus. These parades attracted villagers' attention and acted as an easy marketing ploy to get people to come to the circus. In the late 1800s, politicians noticed this and started to use bandwagons in parades. Bandwagons where literally was a band on a wagon. Started to use bandwagons in parades on their campaign trails. So, basically it evolved from there to just meaning anything to get on board with anything that was popular. But it started with circuses, went to political campaigns, and now it's anything that's popular. You're jumping on the bandwagon.
No point there.
Yeah, it wasn't a very good description. Last one. Back to the drawing board. And maybe we should do that with this show.
Back to the drawing board.
Yeah, where did that originate?
This one's a little more risque.
Oh, boy.
So back in Renaissance France, right, where a lot of the Impressionist artists popped up, one of the things they popularized was...
Maybe they needed some anti-caking agents back then, get it?
Or
let them eat cake.
That was very good.
Yeah.
I was going to say, or
Deep.
chocolate. So one of the popular art forms at the time was naked sculptor, nude painting.
Sure, why wouldn't it be?
It's not popular enough today, I would. And often, a lot of these artists would take advantage of these models. Some of them weren't even really actually artists, but they would con these models into posing nude for them. And at the end of the result, here's what it looks like.
They were the Harvey Weinsteins of their day?
They were the Harvey Weinsteins of their day. It was like a stick drawing. Some poor girl stood out there for 5 hours naked, and really there was no real art behind it. And she would shout, and she got a group together. Hey, all you false artists, you better get back to the drawing board.
I'm glad you got 1 point on the first one because that's not even close. Hey, you false artist. Boy, they must have been really emotionally scarred by being called a false artist.
It was
All
awful.
right.
It was awful.
The saying is attributed to an American artist named Peter Arno, who published his cartoons in the New Yorker. In a comic strip in 1941, we see a man in a fancy suit carrying a bunch of rolled-up papers assumed to be mechanical drawings of an aircraft, walking away from a crashed plane. In the bubble above his head, it read, well, back to the drawing board. So, yeah, I guess if you design a plane that crashes, that's a good reason to go back and try again.
That is a legitimate
We
reason.
want to ride in Peter Arno's, whoever this architect's plane was.
So 1 out of 3.
1 out of 3. Not too bad for you. That's about your norm.
That's about the norm.
Okay, so we're going to finish up the show. Any final comments before we adjourn there, Mr. Kroll?
Thanks for fixing the air conditioning. Thanks
can
for
I turn it on now? I'm hot.
You can turn it back on. Thanks for your Led Zeppelin T-shirt. It helped me out today. And thanks, Mark, for being you.
Oh, thank you, Richie. It's so nice to be with you this week. All right, folks, make sure you tune in next week, and we talk about healthcare insurance. It's just a primer. You like that word, primer? A primer episode where we're not going to talk about...
Not a primer.
Not a primer, primer. I like primer better. But we're just going to talk about healthcare insurance, not the whole healthcare market, not every aspect of it. It's a very complex subject, as we've learned with Obamacare and all the ramifications of that. Just healthcare insurance and some of my observations over the years. I actually used to be licensed to sell health and life insurance, and I have some thoughts on this and how we're going to question the status quo. And as always, please remember, if what you see or hear sounds idiotic, then we're just the guys to help you sort it out. See you all next week. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Are We Idiots Show. Please subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher so you can enjoy all episodes.
On my soul.